Welcome back to Theology for the Unwanted. I'm your host, Dan Tilson, and right across from me, my co-host, my trusty, very honest co-host, John Byram. Say what's up.
I don't like the way you said very honest makes me feel like you're trying to say I'm not honest or something.
No, in fact, the opposite. So on this show, if you're brand new, we are talking to Catholics who are barely hanging on. We are talking to people who feel like their status or something in their life is just not jiving with church rules. And we dive deep into moral theology to see, okay, theology doesn't want us to be stuck. Where do we go from here? So we have a great episode, but we just took our Easter break. So I want to thank you all. Hopefully you took these few weeks to catch up on some old episodes. John, why don't you tell me what's been going on?
Oh, a lot of things. So, I mean, the reason I had that reaction when you were like, oh, my honest co-host kind of thing, right? So I got a new car. You know this, or, a new car back in December.
Yes.
I took it in for the first oil change. And when they called me to let me know it was ready, they said, hey, John, how are you liking your Mazda? And I was like, I don't like the way you said that. What's wrong with it?
Yep.
And they said, oh, nothing. We just know you had a really bad time with your Hyundai and we wanted to make sure you're enjoying your Mazda. And I'm like, okay, don't. Just don't do that.
Do you have trust issues?
When it comes to cars right now, I do, yes.
I don't blame you.
But no, it's been great. Been enjoying the break, taking a little time off, taking a little bit of me time, which I know for people who know me
you don't
personally,
do very much of it, yeah.
I don't really do me time much. So that was kind of nice. I actually went to celebrate your wedding anniversary and my...
Were you celebrating without me?
Well, we had your birthday party / anniversary.
Right, it's like I
right
know
there.
that I celebrated my 1-year wedding anniversary. Congratulations to me.
Congratulations to you and
yes,
Chris.
thank
Absolutely.
You.
I was getting there.
But I also didn't know that I was celebrating it with you.
I mean, there was a party at Sukasa.
It's my birthday.
For your birthday, yeah, which your wedding went past midnight.
Okay, all right.
Anywhoosies. What I'm trying to say is celebrating your anniversary / wedding / birthday and my European extravaganza vacation, if you will, 1 year ago, I went to Busch Gardens and I went through...
Explain what Busch Gardens is.
Busch Gardens is a theme park.
In Virginia, in
Williamsburg, down in the colonial triangle, if you will, like Jamestown, Plymouth, a lot of fun stuff. And it's European themed. So each of the sections of the park is a different country. So in the time span of 14 hours, I went to Italy. I went to Germany. I went to France. I went to Ireland. So it was a slight recreation. I can confirm Europe looks nothing like Busch Gardens. I'm sorry.
Is it possibly just because I know how my people, I'm from Virginia, I know that we don't dress with like this high Milan fashion that you'll see in Northern Italy. Is it because as you were getting off of the rickety wooden roller coaster, you were like, oh.
No, so it wasn't the people. It wasn't even the cast members. And I don't know if they're called cast members. I know in Disney they are.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was the cast members or the employees, more as like just... If we have any German listeners, they're going to appreciate me saying this. Germany is more than just Bavaria. Even though, like, Bavaria is probably the most stereotypical German influence outside of Europe. There's more to Germany than just Bavaria.
It's funny because I was recently pulling the listening stats internationally for somebody for Theology for the Unwanted podcast. And it's not like we have a very big international crowd, but we are grateful for our listeners abroad. And in Germany, they come from Bavaria.
There you go. Perfect.
There's your shout out.
Hey, we love Bavaria.
Well, did you ask any of the cast members, the staff at Busch Gardens, if they had ever been to Europe?
Actually, I did have a conversation in German with one of the cast members
That's crazy. That blows my mind.
In Oktoberfest, which is the other part of Germany.
Yeah.
It's called Oktoberfest, which, again, more to Germany outside of Bavaria and Munich, even though... Personally, I love Bavaria and I love Munich very much. There's more to Germany outside of that amazing region. But yeah, no, it was really cool.
How about the wine in, quote unquote, Italy?
The
section of Busch Gardens is called Italy.
So I have found my calling in life, Dan.
Yes, tell me.
Busch Gardens actually has a wine sommelier for their parks whose only job is to travel the world sample wines and find out what bottles of wine would do well in Busch Garden
And
theme
that is
parks.
exactly why parking is $75 now.
I'll tell you what, though, I literally asked if they were hiring. No, so I did do the wine tasting, which was a really, really cool thing. And these are all wine that was imported from Italy, from Germany, from France. The Italian wines were absolutely fantastic. The German wines, all Rieslings, they were great. The French wine, I don't want to offend anybody. They had some work to do. They were not as good. But no, overall, it was a great experience. I had a lot of fun. First time at Busch Gardens. It was a lot of fun. I'm an adrenaline junkie. I love roller coasters. So I had a fantastic time, quote unquote, retracing my European steps in Busch Gardens.
Well, I recently went to an Ash Nico concert. Now,
Yes.
I know probably a lot of people from our listener group like her. She's very well known amongst queer audiences, but I wouldn't say that she's like mainstream. So she was performing at the Anthem. I'm guessing there were about 6,000 people there. She basically sold it out. So it was an impressive crowd. What was so funny to me was at one point she came out and she's getting ready to start a new set. And she's known for saying crazy stuff on stage. I mean, some of the things she says are truly unhinged. And you're like, I don't know how to react other than laugh. Okay. So she goes, can anyone smell that? And the dancers like immediately put their, over their nose and and they're acting like something stinks. And she goes, no, I mean like it's burning. And suddenly the dancers put their arms above their head and they're now like mimicking a flame. And so I think everyone thought that this was part of the act, right? And she goes, no, cut the show. And she runs off. And if you look at her Instagram, the caption is something like, DC, we almost caught on fire.
Oh, no.
So then, the lights went off and then all the people, security come running down. And I think what may have happened was somebody had a lighter and, got their hair on fire.
Yeah.
And that creates quite a smell. But, for the longest time, even after she yelled, cut the show, and security comes running to the front of the stage, like a lot of us still think this is part of the show because the dancers clearly hadn't figured it out. And now we just know that she has professionals who are on stage with her and all they do is improv whatever crazy, bombastic stuff she says.
It's wild because I never heard of her until Chris brought her up.
Yeah.
And her music videos.
Chris is my husband.
Yeah.
For the listeners.
For the new listeners.
Yeah. I'm not saying that to convince myself.
Well, I hope not.
Okay.
Yeah. So he showed me one of her music videos and it was the craziest music video I've ever seen in my life. The energy was absolutely insane. And based upon your Instagram stories, it looks like you guys had a fantastic time there.
Yeah.
The other night, which I'm very happy for.
Well, to all my millennials, if you remember Miley Cyrus and Can't Stop, if you remember that music video, totally tame compared to Ash Nico.
Yeah.
So, all right, John, I think we have a good show tonight.
Great show. Amazing show.
The idea for this actually came from a recent trip that I had out in the Midwest. And I was visiting a parish and the priest happened to be giving a talk to young adults about freedom.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I was really impressed. For a Tuesday, there were like 70 young adults down there and they're all like, they have their notepads.
Church on a Tuesday?
It wasn't really church because it was a lecture.
Fair.
And there was pizza.
I mean, I'd show up if there's pizza.
Well, anyway, the priest, in my mind, I don't disagree with a single thing that he said. I think academically, from a Catholic perspective, what he said on freedom was wonderful. And granted, what do I know? I'm still learning theology all the time. So the problem was it was a little disconnected from the audience because he's out there saying, there's a few ways that you can choose your vocation in life. You can choose to be holy. And he's like presenting them as buckets, right? So he's like,
okay,
you can be a nun or a priest. And we're like, great. Very few of us in here are interested.
I call that a vocation, but that's fair.
But he's just talking about like freedom and ways to be holy, right?
Okay.
So yeah, we're all like nodding our head. Yeah, you can be a priest and a nun. Or he goes, or you can be married. And a lot of us are like, good. Yeah.
Also vocation.
Yes. Yeah. Then he goes, or believe it or not, The church fully supports you. If you are single, you can be a very holy single person.
Yeah.
And you know how people say things where they feel like they should say it, but they're not actually sure?
I've always said if you're not 100% sure, you probably shouldn't say it. But
Well,
yes.
I think it was just that the guy had been really stuck in the books.
Okay.
Because a young lady raised her hand and she looked relieved to hear that if you're single, you can still be a pillar of holiness. And she goes, Father, that is great. Thank you. Can you tell me any examples of a holy woman of God who's single that I can model my life after? And you can see that she's like, she's sitting up straight and she's at the edge of her seat and she's like waiting for this, right? And the priest, he goes, ah, yes, wonderful question. And then he repeats the question, which none of us needed repeated. And he goes, actually, no, off the top of my head, I can't think of a holy single woman.
So it's crazy. I just did a quick Google search on this, and I'm struggling to find any saints here. Hold on.
Who are not nuns.
Who are not nuns. Yeah. Cause like, oh, Mother Teresa. And it's like, no, Mother Teresa was a sister. She was in religious life. Like, that's a vocation. Like, yeah.
We're not trying to get technical here because believe it or not, nuns, they're not clergy. They are lay people. Correct. According to the church. Yes. So technically you fit in the same category if you're going by the letter of the law. But for the example the woman was looking for here, I mean, Dorothy Day, right? I don't know if you know her now. She really dives into politics. She's at the intersection of politics and church. And so that's a little bit testy for some. Also a chain smoker. I'm pretty sure.
Great band.
So afterwards, like, I think I heard a lot of rumblings from people. They're like, he really should have been prepared for a very easy question like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's not his fault. I don't know that the church is as serious about finding examples of young, single, holy men and women as they should be. Yeah, for the men we have Pier Giorgio Frassati. There's also quite a few like really young ladies. I'm talking about Charlene Richard of, I want to say it's Lafayette, Louisiana, but I think she was only like 12. And Maria Goretti, I think she was also like 12. So that's not super helpful for a 30-year-old woman who is like, this is a talk on freedom and she's trying to understand, what am I free to do?
One of those three buckets.
Apparently. I mean, well, here's the difficulty. We almost make it sound like a game of beer pong, You're taking your ball, your lot in life, and you're throwing it across the yard into one bucket. But it's not like she was asking the question because she wants to know if she should choose to be single. She is single, right? Yeah. She's already there. And she's not sure if she wants to stay there or if she wants to go jump in another bucket.
And also the other thing too is, if you go to mass, what do you constantly hear about at mass? The call to religious life or marriage. You almost never hear a priest during his homily or any other part of the mass or anything talk about the option of being single.
Right.
And what a single person can do with the church and what the church can do for the single person also. It's almost never talked about. So I don't blame her for having that question.
Yeah. I think a lot of people in the audience had questions about dating.
Yeah.
Obviously that's a big moment of vulnerability for all of us, or anyone that is dating. I'm no longer dating. but the point being, I mean, even thinking about how exhausting the dating apps were and swiping and meeting someone, I felt like I had to meet 12 people before I met somebody that I thought was worth really giving a shot for. So, and a lot of people feel that it's even more difficult than that. So I can imagine hoping to get some good advice from your priest, especially when the topic is freedom and conscience and discernment.
Yeah.
So what I want to say is, in Catholic theology, freedom is not about, choice A versus B. It's actually something a little bit more about growth, right? And it's not about preserving us from error. It's not like, dear Lord, don't abandon me to date the wrong person. No, it's about growth in the moment where you are. And so for each of us, it's going to look a little bit different because of our state of life, our state of being, our resources, our, your mental state. These all play into the theology behind freedom.
Yeah, and I think that's the trap we fall into, right? Is like you mentioned those three buckets in this talk. Freedom is not really defined with those buckets, right? Because when you have that kind of structure, you feel like you have to fully commit 100% within those boundaries of that bucket. That's not freedom. Freedom is the ability to, like you said, change based upon where you're at in life at that moment, right? When you take a look at just the secular world in just the secular world itself, you go between single, dating, relationship constantly. It's where you're at. Can you imagine if it was so defined like these buckets, like this priest was saying, that the first person you started dating, it was mandated that you had to get married? Like, I think we can all
honestly, that's not that far in the past where that's a thing.
Well, I understand that, but that's the thing is, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, how like things changed based upon perspective as society grows and evolves. But with the whole thing is freedom's not black and white, right? It's not yes or no. It's where your world is within that gray, your life experience, right? So freedom by its definition doesn't have those boundaries. They're options for freedom, but it's just not those three. There are so many other options you have in the world of freedom.
Definitely. And we're going to dive into what different theologians have said on this topic in a few minutes. I don't know if I ever told you, but one time coming home from a soccer game, I got an Uber, and I'm pretty sure that this driver had turned on the app to work that night because he needed to escape the house, And this man, for 30 minutes from DC back to my apartment in Arlington, Virginia, was telling me about, he married the love of his life, but now her parents are elderly, so they're living with us.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a 4-year-old daughter who constantly needs attention.
Mm.
And between the in-laws and my daughter, I have no time to myself, and I just don't enjoy life. And so he was kind of expressing from his perspective what he would say is a loss of freedom. That's not how Catholic theology would look at it, but he's expressing something really, really important. Where it took a dark turn was when he asked me, and keep in mind, I am the paying customer, just trying to get a ride home late at night. He was like, so at my work, there's a beautiful lady.
Oh, no.
And he asked me if I think it would be okay to kind of go on a date and just see where it goes, right?
No, it's highly inappropriate to have this conversation.
It is super inappropriate, but he was searching for some sort of endorsement from me, a stranger. I don't know why. Right? I said, sir, I think what would be really, really good is if you saved up a little money for a babysitter for a night and you and your wife got away from the in-laws and you just go on a date with your wife and see if you reconnect there. Because there are times where people have told me where their relationship has turned violent or they're not sure if it's abusive. I know a lot of times it can take a while to realize, like, oh my goodness, what's happening to me is not normal. I always say, I'm not an expert in this, so please seek out an expert. But get out. The church doesn't want you to stay inside a physical house where you are potentially at risk of harm.
Yeah.
Okay? So freedom can be very, very difficult, but it's not like jumping out of one bucket into another. It's about that growth and that establishing relationship and your capacity to to break that cycle of decline. We'll talk about that in a minute, from whatever situation that you're in. But I do want to give this warning because I really wish that the priest would have given a lot more thought to all of the things that go wrong when people are thinking about freedom, right? Because as far as I can tell, pretty much every major abuser in the Catholic Church has written or spoken extensively on the topic of Catholic theology and freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, for example, Marco Rupnik, I'm sure you've seen his mosaics in DC. It's in a couple different churches.
A little bit of a scandal there.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure they've been covered up or in the process of being taken down.
Yeah.
But anyway, he talked a little bit, allegedly, we'll say, because I'm not sure these things have been resolved. But he talked allegedly about freedom through constraints. In a good Catholic world, we're often taught like, hey, here's a rule. And if you're struggling with the rule, then maybe you're the problem. Unfortunately, that can go too far.
Very toxic.
Yeah. and this priest, Marco Rupnik, allegedly would tell people that he was interested in having relations with that, hey, if you don't obey, I'm the priest and it's going to stall your spiritual journey.
Clericalism.
Yeah, I mean, that's the horror of clericalism, which often comes in much more innocent, everyday forms that, you don't have to think too much about. This is the extreme.
It's an abuse of power. It's realizing your position within the church and utilizing it for, this lack of better terms, unholy wants and desires.
Right. And from the victim's perspective, and again, we'll say allegedly here, because we don't know precisely what happened, but there were suggestions that Father Rupnik was telling people that true freedom kind of transcends, it goes beyond individual boundaries, right? Which is nuts. I mean, but he's using the words, or allegedly using the words, that would normally trigger a theological mindset.
Yes.
We're talking about spiritual journey. We're talking about obedience. We're talking about true freedom. I can't tell you how often I've heard someone say true freedom right before they tell you how to constrain yourself.
Yeah, this whole thing that it reminds me of, I think it was like one of our earlier episodes, we talked about vocabulary and how people like to use words that will justify their position, justify where they're coming from, or give them credibility. And that's what I feel like is happening in these situations where allegedly these are his words that he used. He's using it in a way that sounds theological, thus justifying what he's trying to say to the parishioner who may not be as educated in theology as he is. And that's where the abuse of power comes from, which is why there's a big push to kind of use normal, everyday language to convey these messages and stop trying to hide behind complicated terms or theological sayings that people just aren't educated on.
We all get hoodwinked, though.
Yes.
So, I mean, I truly, genuinely believe that John Paul II is a saint, but there's so much evidence out there that he was hoodwinked by some of his advisors and promoting people who clearly had shameful records, except he assumed because he loved the church so much. And if he knows because he gave his life as a priest, how could a priest possibly do something so evil? Right. And I really respect that innocence, but we get hoodwinked.
Yeah.
And I'll give one more example of this on the topic of freedom. Jean Vanier, he's a Canadian. He's really big in the pro-life movement. I don't know that he's necessarily big in the abortion or pro-life side of things, but he established a lot of homes for people with intellectual disabilities so that they could live together. I mean, this guy was long considered a walking, breathing, living saint. He got awards from the Knights of Columbus, from Notre Dame University. And again, allegedly, because I don't know how everything has been finished as far as being litigated through the courts, but he would say things that would suggest freedom is not autonomy, right? And we love being countercultural as Catholics, don't we?
Yes, we do.
So, I mean, immediately, if I'm to ask somebody, what does it mean to be free? They're probably going to tell you it has something to do with being autonomous, right? Like, I have agency. I make decisions, okay? So Jean Vanier was suggesting in some form or fashion that freedom is not autonomy, but it's liberation from the ego.
Which I have a huge issue with that idea. Liberation from the ego. What is the definition of ego? Well, obviously it's Latin for I, but the definition of ego is a person's consciousness sense of self-worth, self-identity, and individuality. So if he's going to go here and say that you have to get over your ego, like if you have to suppress your ego, your self-worth, your self-identity, your self-individuality, he's essentially saying that you need to ignore who you are and trust me or your priest or whatever authority in the church and suppress your self-worth, your self-identity, your individuality. And that's where abusers can really hit a home run, is when they're saying, hey, look, your self-worth is not good in the eyes of the church. Your self-identity is not good in the eyes of the church because it's egotistical. It's a negative, right? You're supposed to strive for Christ, right? At the cost of denying your own humanity and your own acknowledgement that you are created in the image and likeness of God. That is a psychological mind twist that abusers use to gain trust and authority over someone.
The really hard thing for all of us, because we all want to be free. The church wants us to be free. The hard thing is realizing that a prerequisite for freedom is knowing all of the things deep down that you're pushing away, that you don't want to bubble up to the surface.
Yeah.
This is true in politics, where, like, when people talk about corruption, sometimes the bribes happen because somebody has dirt on the other.
Yeah.
And so this examination of our own conscience, not necessarily our sins, but what are those things about ourselves where we don't have that self-esteem, or we don't yet have that sense of how we want to be seen by others. So many priests heard my confession and heard that I was struggling with same-sex attraction, and they would say, well, you're called to the priesthood. And so I really spent so many years trying to make peace with the idea that that is the bucket that I fit into, when in reality, if there's only one bucket that you could possibly fit in, you're not really free, right?
Yeah, and it almost feels like it's a disingenuous response, right? It's, you're going to the priest, you're going to the church because you were told that if you are struggling with something, if there's something on your heart, on your soul, you come to the church for guidance. You come to the church for clarity. Did you feel like you got clarity in that moment when you said, Father, I'm struggling with same-sex attraction, and his response was priesthood?
In the moment, yes.
Okay. But looking back at it now,
no.
There you go. See, in the moment,
it gave me permission actually to not allow things to bubble up to the surface, but instead it gave me permission to let them simmer.
It was a Band-Aid.
It was a Band-Aid.
But the thing is it didn't give you the guidance that you needed. It gave you an answer to where you were at then and there in your life. And what you didn't hear was a rejection of you from the church. You heard a calling from the priest saying, oh, if this is what you're struggling with, that's a calling to the priesthood.
The church is still learning how to be merciful.
Yes.
I love that person that commented the other day on Instagram. They're like, wow, your patience for the church is astonishing. And I almost replied, thank you. And then I was like, wait, it wasn't a compliment.
No,
it wasn't. So if you remember the moral theology definition of mercy from Father James Keenan, Boston College, he says mercy is entering into the chaos of another. So that's exactly what Christmas is, right? Jesus is entering into the chaos of the human world here on earth. That's what the crucifixion and resurrection is. And, actually, right before Pope Benedict XVI became Pope, he was Cardinal Ratzinger, and he was actually on that committee that was drafting the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And it's really important for everyone to remember how we view the Catechism. First, there are several layers of truth in there. You have divine revelation, which can never be changed. You have absolute teachings that everyone in the church accepts. If you are Catholic, like the Eucharist, it is the real true presence of Christ. And then you have other things, which are things that the church authoritatively believes, but subject to history and our understanding and our willingness to go deeper in Christ's love, we hope to word things in a better way going forward. And I know that Pope Benedict XVI, when he was still drafting this, he was terrified of people that were going to put everyone into neat little buckets. So he pulled out this one really specific quote from Aquinas that I love. And John, you see it there. It's in Catechism of the Catholic Church. It's 170.
Yeah, it says, we do not believe in formulas, but in those realities they express, which faith allows us to touch. The believer's act of faith does not terminate in the propositions, but in the realities which they express.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is bold. This is bold because so many people will write in saying, like, hey, you are not following the letter of the law. And I'm like, well, the church kind of says that that's not a healthy approach. I do hold everything that the church says is firmly to be believed. I 100% hold on to it, truly. And I'm not just saying that. I really, truly assent and I believe. And then I know there are some things in the church that we are struggling with that are going to take maybe more than a century to work out, including emerging issues like the fact that some people might actually be gay, that it's not just a rebellion, that it might actually be. And so we don't believe in formulas. This is a quote from Aquinas that Cardinal Ratzinger put in. We don't believe in formulas, but we believe in the realities they express. And so I want to say, when you are examining all the things that you're trying to like push deep down, you are not yet free. That is okay. This is something that happens in stages for all of us. It's a long and messy process. The process of becoming free is super similar to the process of holiness, right? So we've talked about Aristide Fumagalli before. He's a professor at the seminary in Milan, and he's a priest. And he says, we can't talk about freedom as a choice between A, B, C. That doesn't really work. That's a formula. Freedom isn't a shield that preserves us from error. It is the engine of growth. And so he likes to use this phrase a lot. He says the possible good, right? So sometimes we're going to be in scenarios where things are just not going to be all that great. I remember at work today, somebody was like, hey, this assignment's coming up and I'm really anxious about it. And I was like, listen, it is going to suck. And we're just going to do the best that we can, right? That's the freedom that we have is, do you choose to make this as good as you can? And we always talk about freedom as Catholics as something that's looking up. That's because our freedom is inherently tied to the Holy Spirit, to Christ, to all of God's creation and that desire for unity. So whenever someone is choosing to kind of just like look inward in your own desires or to like push things deep down, that's not what we would call freedom. So, Jon, do these things happen in a vacuum?
No. I mean, the thing is people tend to forget, the church does change. It just doesn't change overnight. We've talked about it before where we had, the church's stance on sex written by monks and cells back in the medieval era. And obviously the church has grown and redefined things as society has changed, time has changed, but it's not something that happened overnight, right?
I think what you might be referencing to that conversation we had about how, assault was actually not considered intrinsically evil, but, forms of self-pleasure were. And you're like, whoa, they got that reversed. Yeah. Over time, we were like, hey, we've got our priorities wrong because we're not looking at the deepness of the human person.
Yeah. So the whole thing is that the church, I feel people tend to forget is operated, for lack of better terms, by humans, and humans make mistakes. We talk and hear about mistranslations of certain texts in the Bible and how that's changed over the years based upon learning more about what the original word meant, hundreds and thousands of years ago, and how it applies to present day language. So when you take a look at how the church searches for possible good, when you take a look at the church's stance on like the LGBT community within the church, we're starting to see now the church is kind of opening that door to the idea of, one, acknowledging that there are LGBT Catholics in our parishes, that they are a part of our community, and that the church needs to look at how they deal with this community within the church, because what they're saying right now is not exactly a welcoming message for faithful Catholics who are a part of the LGBT community. And that's something that's going to take time. That's something that they are exploring. That's something that they are diving into, those sacred texts, those theologians throughout the history of the church, and interpreting what that means in present day reality.
So you kind of describe the possible good from the perspective of things that are going on around you. And that's 100% true.
Yeah.
Because if you think only a couple hundred years ago, most everything was an arranged marriage.
Correct.
Yeah. And so you may be like, this person really, Father Dearest, this is, because of the dowry. Got it.
Yeah. So really, this is a question for your parents is how many cows, sheep, horses, and lambs are you worth? I'm going to ask my parents that. I'm going to see what I'm worth in cattle.
I have a bird feeder now in my backyard, so I can trade in blue jays and cardinals,
and finches, and
finches. No, but this, we have to respond to the possible good around us, but also what's going on internally. So thinking of that young lady that had the courage to raise her hand and ask about holiness as a single woman, it reminds me of when somebody reaches out to me on social media and they're like, "Hey, do you believe in celibacy?" Which is always like kind of a pointed question. I'm not really sure if they're like trying to gotcha. Yeah, of course. Of course I believe in celibacy. And sometimes the conversation goes, "Well, do you think I should be celibate?" I'm like, listen, freedom is about forming that relationship according to how God made you. So when chosen freely or by grace of God, if you are celibate and if that is what you're aiming to do, I think that is a beautiful thing, genuinely. And a lot of people tell me that they find that their lives to be more fruitful because of that. You also have a lot of people that are like, I don't know, I'm like really trying to and you can hear the anxiety and they're like, I'm trying. I was told I have to be celibate, right? No, there are things that go on in our lives that we try and push down that inherently make it difficult for us to make a free choice. And part of that is this idea we have in our heads that there's only one possible bucket. That's why we talked about that Aquinas quote a minute ago. We as Catholics do not believe in formulas. That is a quote in the Catechism. We'll say it again. We do not believe in formulas. Okay. And yes, we use formulas, which is the next part of that catechism. We do use formulas as a general guide because it's the proposition, the idea that we are all on the way together to unity with Christ and to human flourishing. We are on the way together, and we think that these simple guardrails will help you get there. But we don't believe in formulas for the sake of it. You have to look at the person and what they're experiencing and how they're made and what their mental state is and what their capacity for choice is.
So there's a lot of people in the church that feel like they're just barely holding on and they really don't have a choice at all. They're just doing the bare minimum and they don't feel like it's good enough.
And they feel like they're judged for not.
Yeah, they're judged.
Freely not doing the best that they can. Is that what you're saying?
It's one thing when you go to a parish, and we were joking about this in our pre-show. When you go to a parish and like it feels like it's so organized and it's so well put together that you feel like your internal messiness is going to mess everything up. Like everyone's risers go up at the same time and it's one solid pop. It's not popcorn, right? It's everyone stands up and everyone is saying the prayer. Everyone's singing, everyone's chanting, all on the same word, note, tune, everything.
Terrifying.
Everything is militaristic, right? Like it's the worst case scenario. Or here's one. You came back to church for the first time and you realize, and it's not, and also with you anymore.
Oh yeah.
Right? And you say on also with you and not realize it's with your spirit.
So that was 15 years ago.
I'm just saying there may be some people out there.
I'm not trying to judge you. I'm just saying.
But it feels like when you make a mistake like that, you get that Catholic eye. You get that side eye.
Yeah, I do hear people tell me that they made a small mistake kneeling at the wrong time, or maybe they said the extra part of the Our Father at the end, and yep.
I was just about to say that to our Protestant brothers and sisters out there. I always warn my friends when they come to Mass with me that they need to pause when we do that part, because I don't want to. Because a lot of times, if you're not in the Catholic Church, you don't know about it. You don't know that there's a part in between.
Yeah.
That the priest talks before you finish up the prayer, and you don't want to have that awkward moment because that can be a bad taste in your mouth. That can be off-putting.
Okay, this is good. Let's talk about the widow's mite. You see that in two Gospels, in Mark and Luke. And, I'm not recalling all the details off the top of my head, but the gist of it is this poor woman who's a widow gives her last 2 coins. She essentially gave everything, right? And Jesus takes note. He was like, really? Financially? It's not doing much for the congregation, but it was everything. And that was the point, that he cares what the heart is giving. Now, earlier when we talked about the abusers, allegedly, the abusers are saying, well, absolute obedience and giving everything that's when you know that you're free, right? And that's a really almost diabolical reading of the widow's mite. But Aquinas talked about this. Aquinas said, God invites us to take good things. So if we believe that being in the church, being a part of this family is a good thing, God invites you to take this. It's not for me to take away, because God has invited you. So if you feel like, gay, or I'm divorced and remarried, or, my pastor knows I've missed 17 of the last 52 Sundays. And by the way, you wouldn't be alone, because I've seen the attendance figures. But God invites you to take good things. And Aquinas says that we're not approaching them through these bureaucratic blueprints, but by pious desires and devout prayers. So if you think about it this way, a blessing doesn't really belong in the same way to a person who's perfect. It belongs to the sinner. It belongs to the one who doesn't feel like I've got it all together. And that is what God desires and what God values. I think for Catholics who have felt unwanted, what we want to make sure is that you're not seeking the best possible good in your situation because you feel pressure to, because you want to be seen, but because you want that relationship. Again, freedom is a relationship. Let's talk about Neil Ormerod. Also in the pre-show, I made the mistake. I don't know why. I thought Darwin was from Australia.
Darwin's a town in Australia?
I know, yeah. This is one of the dumbest things I've said in a while.
I don't know about that.
Okay. But Neil Ormerod, he is a phenomenal theologian in Australia, and he is an expert in anthropology and this evolution of man. Like, how do we become man? And so when God says that he breathed life into Adam, right? Looking at this from a theological perspective and an attitude of freedom, what does that mean? And he says, freedom, it's moving beyond biology, right? It's not mere instinct of, I need water, I need sleep. It's the ability to act towards self-transcendence. I don't know if that makes sense, but I guess we could say that in another way. It's the ability to in economic terms, unfortunately, like to make value.
Yeah.
You almost become a co-creator because you have the ability to share ideas and produce new knowledge. And this is a beautiful talent that humankind has. So he says, freedom is moving beyond biology. It's the capacity to act outside of instinct and biological need. But most importantly, from a Catholic perspective, it's about breaking that cycle of decline.
Yes.
I was in a small town in the Gulf Coast a few weeks ago. This is my 3rd visit to that town. And every single time I've gone, there has been yet another storefront that has closed. And I got to tell you, the town does a fantastic job of maintaining these storefronts. Everything always looks brand new, but it always has a for lease sign. And there's this cycle of decline, right? Freedom is the human capacity to break that cycle of decline. And that obviously ties very, very closely to the crucifix, right? There's this cycle of decline in the human race. And so God becomes man and he destroys that cycle through the resurrection, of course. We always talk about the cross and the resurrection together. So I don't know, John, in my notes here, I have something about self boundaries.
Yeah. So when you take a look at ways to break cycles, right? So obviously you gave a very, very strong presentation on how that looks within our faith. But what about like in our everyday life where a lot of our stress can come from? When you're in a situation where it's negatively impacting you as a person, right? So if you're in a situation where you know you're hanging out with someone, like for an example, you're hanging out with someone and you started out as friends, but as the years go on, there's certain traits this person has that has a negative impact on you, whether they're taking advantage of your generosity, whether they're, you know, abusing your friendship by relying on you to get them out of trouble all the time, or they make you feel uncomfortable now when you are hanging out or you're out in public or you're doing something like that. Freedom is also recognizing the need for self boundaries, for putting up those guardrails for yourself. Just like the church has guardrails for the faithful of saying, hey, look, these guardrails are here to help you. We can do that ourselves in our own life. We don't have to be stuck in a vicious cycle where our social life is so dependent on a certain person or a certain group of people that we have to take those negative interactions because we wouldn't have a social life or friends or a community if we didn't put up with it. Sometimes freedom is being able to take a step back and break that cycle, saying, my generosity doesn't have to be abused in this situation. My financial wealth doesn't need to be abused by my friends saying, hey,
Right.
can I borrow $200 and they never pay you back, kind of thing. So small things like that, right?
Well, that's the everyday scenario, and that's why it's so important to recognize it in our personal lives.
Correct.
Freedom comes with maturity. That's why when theologian Fumagalli says that it's about a process of growth,
Yes.
it's not like you have to marry the first person you date, right? Or be devastated when you break up with that person. No, you are to grow in that moment.
Yes.
And then you should choose to unite your will to Christ and then continue to grow. It doesn't mean you have to marry the second person you date or the third. And you can choose to be single at the end of all of these dates. But
I think a really good point here is the sign of a mature person growing is when they're in a relationship and that relationship comes to an end, regardless of how it ends, whether it's a clean breakup or a nasty breakup, is taking time for self-reflection.
mm-hmm.
What went right in that relationship? What went wrong? What did I learn about myself? Right? And if you're religious, like most of our listeners are, if you're a Catholic, you're going to take that to prayer most of the time and reflect on it and see what you're being called to next. And a lot of time for a lot of people, when you get out of a nasty relationship, what's the phrase we usually say? I'm never dating again. Right? It's kind of like that one time you drank too much, you woke up with a hangover. I'm never drinking again. Right? That's a momentary reaction based upon a negative. Right? 3 weeks later, you're going to go back out and drink again. Right? Who knows? Maybe in 3 months, maybe you're ready to put yourself back out there and you have that emotional maturity and you're ready to put yourself back out there to try a relationship again, knowing what you now know based upon your past relationship.
Fears are really important to take into consideration too, because we all desire that lack of control. Like if we could shake a crystal ball and see what the future holds, I mean, if we could really do that, I think everybody would. And this fear of loneliness drives us to take action too. I mean, there are a number of people at this point in my life where I have seen get married because I think that they felt that was what they were supposed to do. And you know what? For a lot of them, it has brought stability. Not perfection, but it's brought stability. And so I'm not saying I recommend that for anyone, but you have to know what are the fears and anxieties that you're pushing deep down in order to truly be free. Now, maybe while you're dating, you're still going to have that fear of loneliness and you're like, I need to lock this down now. No, I think you just need to be aware of what those fears are and kind of have it to the side, but separately discern what is a relationship like with this person here. And that's where you'll find freedom. John, on my first day of high school, I was offered drugs.
Wow. Wait, you went to a Catholic school?
I know.
Wow, that sounds like something that happens at my public school.
Double drugs, right? No. And it was exactly like every Disney Channel show had warned me it would be like, you walk into high school and they're like, hey, I can sell you a bag of whatever for $10. Looking at you, Donald. Point being that freedom comes with maturity. Again, it's about that growth. It's not about having complete and total control in the moment, but it's about that process of growth. And when you're younger, you don't necessarily have all that together. And so you kind of know what you're supposed to do because your parents have taught you, or Disney Channel has warned you that this is coming. And of course, wanting to be seen as a goody two shoes, I was willing on my first day of high school to kind of be that quote unquote martyr where I was like, no, thank you.
I could still see you doing that today.
And immediately become uncool, but I knew I was doing the right thing, And that's not without value, but that was not a mature moment. That was simply me making a decision based off of what I had been told was right. Over time, you start to internalize, okay, this is not good for myself, for my family, for my career. Unfortunately, a lot of us make mistakes along the way and, end up into some real trouble. That's why I wanted to apply the two examples where Fumagalli talks about it as growth and Ormerod talks about freedom as breaking that cycle of decline.
Yeah.
So how do we apply this to a prisoner, right? Let's assume that you were correctly convicted of something and you're behind bars and you've got 10 years. Okay. I was thinking of that Netflix show with the two brothers that, shot their parents and now they were like, there was a documentary about them and everybody became super sympathetic.
I remember. Yeah.
And so what's interesting was there's a scene in the documentary where the counselor says, listen, you keep thinking about getting out. Your life is here. You need to make peace with the fact that your life is inside these walls now and you have a choice, right? So it's about making that possible good within the cell block. Is it a kind word to the guard? Is it a moment of prayer? Is it refusing the cycle of violence within the prison? These are the moments where we learn to have freedom, obviously, in very difficult circumstances.
Yeah, so it's the Menendez brothers.
The Menendez brothers, that's right.
But I mean, you have to find freedom in your situation. Obviously, if you're a prisoner, you have. So you mentioned guardrails. You mentioned formulas that we don't work with formulas in the church. Well, in prison they do, right? It's A plus B equals bathroom time versus yard time versus. So like everything is very structured for you. So you have to find the freedom within that. Yes, you have to have the freedom to come to terms with your situation, with what you did, and you also have that freedom to make that choice to, as you said, break the cycle. We here in the most incarcerated population in a country here in the United States, we have the highest incarcerated population in the world. We also have the highest percentage of repeat offenders.
Right.
They have the freedom to break the cycle. Sometimes their situations can be skewed and they can't break the cycle. That's an argument for another time when it comes to our criminal justice system, but they still have that freedom to make that choice to break the cycle.
If freedom is in relationship with the Holy Spirit, with God, so that suggests inherently that there's a communal element to it.
Yes.
The question becomes, what is the church doing to support freedom, right? We ask a lot of things of people in the church. Now, hold on. With my catechism class, when we're doing not the profession of faith, but like right before they get confirmed, what is it? Their baptismal promises, right? I do exactly what Father Peter did for us.
Okay.
Because the very first one, I don't know if you remember, it's, do you reject Satan? Right. And of course, the kids are like all nervous for, talking to the bishop. And so they're like, I do. I'm like, no. The church is going to ask some really tough stuff of you, and it's not going to support you in that. But this one is easy. Do you reject Satan? I want you to shout that at the bishop. Right. But the point that you and I were talking about before the episode was the church community doesn't make true freedom easy for so many of us.
So Dan, I would have to imagine that the church really struggles with outliers, right?
Yep.
We wouldn't have this podcast. You wouldn't have to write this book if the church was great at dealing with people who the church deems on the fringe or trying to push people out of the church or whatever.
Paulus Press would not have to have had reprinted my book twice if there were only a couple of outliers.
Correct. So the church does not deal well with things that don't fit the cookie cutter mold of a Catholic. Right. So let's say you're an LGBT member of the church. You're a divorced parent of the church or divorced person of the church. You're someone who is struggling with an addiction. You want to be faithful. You go to church. You go to confession. And then you say the thing that has been weighing you down, right? I'm a divorced person. I left my wife. Or I'm an LGBT Catholic.
That takes courage to say. I mean,
100%.
Going into the confessional because you anticipate that judgment.
But what does the priest say from behind the screen? Like, you're looking for an answer from the church. You're looking for guidance. You're looking for those guide rails because you're so frantic that you want to stay a part of this community, but you don't know how. So you're going to the church to ask for those guardrails. And what does the priest say to you?
I'm glad you're here.
The worst possible thing they could say.
It's not the worst possible, but it's not helpful.
It's not the worst possible, but essentially that phrase of I'm glad you're here, it does not solve anything.
No.
It doesn't even acknowledge the pain and suffering that person is dealing with, the amount of pain and suffering it took for them to even gain the courage to say it with their lips. Like, that's the one thing we as Catholics constantly talk about in confession. Why is our confession different from the Protestant version of confession? Why can Protestants just pray to God and be like, in their mind going, hey, I'm sorry about X, Y, and Z. And the Catholic Church is like, no, you need to say it with your lips. It is so much harder to verbalize something you're dealing with. It is so much harder to, like, as the kids say, put it into the universe, right? You say it out loud. And when the church says, I'm glad you're here, to me, if I was to hear that, I would be like, I'm glad you're here. Please sit in the back row, out of sight, out of mind. And that is not the correct response.
In Theology for the Unwanted, the book, there is an encounter I had with a priest in confession, and it was a really impactful, transcendent moment for me, right? We're talking about freedom here. The priest had the ability in that moment to truly set me free. And again, we often talk about that in terms of constraint when we're talking theology, but he was truly setting me free. He said, Daniel, he said, you are not visiting with a judge. You are visiting with a physician of Christ. And maybe you have become biased against yourself because people have said many mean things in the past. But I want you to know that we only sin when we fail to bother to love others, to love God, and to love ourselves as God made us, right? That really set me on a different path. And that is a moment of God's freedom enter. I mean, like, talk about the echoes of the Holy Spirit, right? He's saying the chains are lifted off of you. You felt like you've had to perform and shame yourself because you don't fit into what the rules say. But we don't deal with formulas in this church. Not according to the Catechism, paragraph 170. We deal with the reality of the person in front of us and try to understand how God's love is working, even in complicated ways. And no, he's not endorsing anything that he considers sinful. He's saying there's a person in front of me, and clearly the blessing of God belongs to this person because that's how God speaks to us.
Yeah.
That's why, I mean, I wasn't ever going to give up on the sacrament of confession, but I was like white knuckling through it beforehand. Let's go through just a couple more examples here while we wrap up. This one's going to hit you, John. We call this the giver, the person that is overscheduled, overexerting oneself.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I mean, like, John, you do a lot of incredible things, and But when I'm talking about someone that is overexerting themselves, this is not always the case. But I think, again, we have to talk about what are those things that we're pushing deep, deep down.
Yeah.
And for some people, being a slave to your calendar is a fear of failure or a failure of freedom in itself. You know that you have these biological needs, but you also have this desire towards self-gift.
Yeah.
And a lot of us in this world don't know how to have that balance. I get reminded that by my spouse weekly.
I get reminded by you and a few other people that, I need to be better at saying no to things, to commitments. And my friends who understand my personality, my personality traits and my personality flaws understand that I can overwhelm myself with commitments and I can become forgetful. So I have to use a calendar. I check my calendar consistently, whether or not it's just for work, but for my personal life too, because I'm afraid of overcommitting or double booking myself or something like that. But I also need to learn to say no for my own well-being.
Yes.
So I'm not getting 5 hours of sleep a night. I'm not running myself all over God's green earth, helping out everyone just because I'm the reliable friend or they think I'm the reliable friend or I can help out with X, Y, and Z. Like I need to make sure I'm taking care of myself because if I don't take care of myself in that free time, I can't help others.
And that would be an example of discerning the possible good.
Yes.
Right? So we all feel these pressures that we put on ourselves that others put on us. Weirdly, there was a priest a couple years ago who thought that I spent every Sunday volunteering with the homeless because I was like trying to make up for the fact that I'm gay. And I'm like, how sad. Father, if you thought that was happening, you should have said, hey, you should have said, stop that. And then he thought that maybe it was a way to fill my loneliness. I'm like, okay, you're raising all kinds of red flags of theology. One, no, I feel perfectly happy with this. But two, I do feel some pressure because I don't want people to have to grow up in the kind of church that I grew up in, and I take that really, really personally. But then at the same time, I have to remember a gift of self to prove a point, no good. A gift of self at the peril of my own biological needs and health, no good. And so I don't want to say freedom is the middle ground. That's not necessarily true, but it's about uniting yourself to this sense of human flourishing rooted in the Holy Spirit. And I guess what I want to say for everyone before we go into the last example is thinking of that girl that bravely raised her hand in that church and said, Father, can you think of a single woman that's holiness? The church is not always ready to laud the examples that we say we are ready to laud. Okay. There is no perfect formula for you in your life. There are only these principles that we believe as Catholics that are truly rooted in truth and in Christ. And it is a long, messy path towards reaching that freedom.
So this is what kind of blows my mind here with that priest's response to your ministry with helping out the homeless population and wanting to make sure that Catholics don't grow up in the same church that you did.
Tell me.
What blows my mind is, Dan, you're living out the Beatitudes. You're living out what Christ asked us to do, right?
It must be my lack of freedom.
How crazy is it that you fulfilling what Christ asked Christians to do, take care of the homeless, visit the incarcerated, clothe the naked, like doing those things raised a flag with that priest. And he came to you and said, are you doing this to make up for the fact that you're gay? That is such an acute way of thinking.
This is a real thing that happened. I'm not exaggerating.
I know, but I'm saying it blows my mind that you and your religious freedom within your boundaries that you have set for yourself and the church has set for you, use that freedom to live out the Beatitudes, what Christ has asked us to do. And an official of the church came to you and said, are you doing this because you're trying to make up for the fact you're gay? How absurd.
It's a perfect segue, I think, into the last example I wanted to talk about. Because listen, if you look at the history of our church, I always believe that the church has had good intentions theologically, but that we are still working out how to express them, how to live them, how to really concretely connect them to your daily life. So if you're waiting, if you're staying in the church because you need an endorsement from the church and you're just hoping it's going to come, don't, right? Don't feel like you need to be seen by the church, because it is Christ himself who invites you. I mean, this is found in the great tradition of the church and our intellectual tradition, that the invitation is for you, and that the blessing that the church offers belongs to the person who is messier or not, fully in accord with the church laws. It belongs to you before it belongs to the saints. And that is what we believe in theology. So let's talk about freedom real quick for a lot of listeners who may be in the closet, who are considering telling their parents the environment is presumed, it's not always, but presumed to be unsupportive. Your parish may be unsupportive. Okay, what does freedom look like or not look like in that scenario? Most of the time people come to me and they say, hey, what? They basically want to preserve themselves from error. They want to feel free, but they want to break as few rules in the church as possible. So they come to me and they're like, hey, I finally accepted that I am a man who's attracted to other men, and that's terrifying. Basically, I have needs. How do I break as few rules as possible and get by?
Looking at it that way, it's a missed opportunity.
Why?
Because I feel like there's an opportunity there to love another according to how you're made.
I think that's the crux of it, right? I mean, we all innately have this desire for relationship. I think a lot of people are putting a pause on that question because the church hasn't ruled on it.
Yeah.
By the way, when I say the church hasn't ruled on it, I say that's because if you look at the doctrine of the theology, there's this underlying assumption that people are gay because it's either a rebellion or a choice or a pathology, meaning it's like some sort of illness. And the way we are talking about it, sexual orientation, the first time the Catholic Church ever even flirted with the idea that sexual orientation might exist was 1975. So it's a new question.
Yep.
And the church has also clarified that the Bible had absolutely no concept of sexual orientation as you and I are talking about it. So we'll just level set there. But because people feel like they can't get this church endorsement for what they desire according to how they believe they were made, they settle for something that is just, quite frankly, so much sadder, which is, how do I avoid breaking rules?
And I feel like part of that, it stems from society and from the church, right? Because you're constantly told that what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, how you're created is wrong, right? You're constantly hearing that from the time you're a kid growing up in the church. It's negative, it's negative, it's negative, it's negative. So you internalize that negativity. And what happens is you find yourself in a situation where all you really want is to have the church walk with you.
Oh,
that's all you want. You're not asking for acceptance. You're asking for the church to meet you where you are and walk with you.
That's so true. So that I'm saying this for the listeners. We did the blessing ceremony in Belgium, right?
Yes.
The listeners may know that the Vatican recently struck down similar blessings in Germany, but they left Belgium alone. Why? Germany's insisting that the church's hand be forced and that she revisit the idea of sexual morality and doctrine right now. But that's not how doctrine is made. Doctrine develops often over centuries, because we walk not in unison, but in unity together towards the deeper understanding of the person as Christ was made. Belgium isn't that. Belgium is like, we're not offering an endorsement. We don't fully understand what's going on in your life. We're not endorsing it. We are simply saying, okay, you have made a stable, positive commitment, a union. There's clearly love here. You are clearly living virtues, even if it's not the way the documents say they should. And so we're going to stick our necks out and we're going to walk with you. And that's why we were able to have our blessing. I made it very clear, by the way. I don't know if you remember my conversation with the Archdiocese of Brussels, but I was like, please, I do not want to go to Germany I want to have nothing to do with what they're doing because it felt political.
Yeah.
And it's kind of worthless for me to feel like I have a political endorsement. No. What I want is a mental attitude where the church says, okay, we're going to walk with you on this. And the endorsement, you're probably not going to get that in your lifetime, but we're here and we love you anyway because we don't work with formulas. Jon, it makes me sad when people get used to the disappointment of feeling like they can't have a relationship because the mental state turns into, a sort of self-eroticism. And the mental state is someone that they want to love or someone that they do love just becomes a tool for gratification. And we need to break that cycle of decline because real love, which goes way beyond the biology, real love is an experience of two people uniting themselves. It's the experience of friends being able to see one another for exactly who they are. Love is the disarmed experience where you do not have to put on a show. Last night I was cranky, and you know what? I didn't feel too embarrassed about it because we're married and he's just got to put up with it.
It was written in the contract. Is that what it was?
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel free to be me. I don't have to. It's not like when we were first dating in the very beginning. I would be very careful about being cranky in front of someone that I wanted to impress, right? No. And by the way, he's much sillier than he appeared to be in the first 5 dates. He was a very serious person in the first 5 dates. And then suddenly that lawyer attitude went away. And I'm like, whoa, I'm dating a new person in month 2. So love is this freedom where you don't have to pretend.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for so many Catholics in the closet, because they don't feel like they can have that transcendent moment or they don't feel like they can break that cycle of decline, they stay trapped and they settle for a tool. That's what we need to help break in the church. And what I think all Catholics who are in the closet need to consider is what you mentioned, missed opportunity. Is there that opportunity to love another according to the way that I was made? Okay. You might interpret that as I'm called to celibacy and I have these really good friendships, but I'm like, I really feel like this is a good place for me to be. Okay. Bring that to prayer. That's good. You may feel like, hey, I might need to take a riskier path here because I'm not able to live alone. I'm not able to live without a partner. Okay. That's another risk that you have to take. But all of these things must be brought to prayer because there's not a specific bucket that you fit in.
The church is getting better at walking with people.
Definitely.
And I think the moment that my eyes kind of really opened to where the church was in that moment of being willing to walk with people where they are in their life was, I remember there was a religious life prayer that we did in Chicago when I was with the Franciscans. And the parish that we were at that was hosting, the parishioners were nice enough to cook the religious organizations a beautiful potluck afterwards. And I remember I'm sitting there with one of my postulants, my postulant brothers, and 2 of the volunteers that were there at that parish were clearly in a committed gay relationship. And one of my fellow postulants made a comment about it. And our formator said, they are here for the same reason you are, for God's love and for the church to walk with them. And at that moment, everything I learned from converting to Catholicism in my home diocese kind of shattered, because that for the first time, I felt like I saw Jesus walk with people in the church where they're at, and not the people in the church demanding people to conform to the formulas of the church. And it was beautiful, the respect everyone had. And these 2 gentlemen were treated just like everyone else. There was no difference. They are children of God, and that's all that matters.
It's really difficult to follow that up with anything because that's so beautiful. So I guess I'll go ahead and start the ending here and say, listen, for all of our listeners out there, we are so grateful for all of your messages. We love reading them. We really cherish your courage and bravery in processing whatever it is that's going on in your life that's difficult. Your stories matter for the church. And so if you don't have somebody around you that you're able to talk with at this moment and just kind of say like, hey, I don't feel wanted in my parish, you can always find me and John at theologyfortheunwanted.com. You can send us a message. You can find us on social media. We thank you. We want you to know that your stories do matter for the future of the church. And so until next time,